Well, I guess it's time to admit it. I'm not really an artist. Those of you who are familiar with what I do, familiar with my channel, or maybe my Instagram, y'all might know that my watercolor palette looks like this. Now, for the uninitiated, this is a huge watercolor palette, and every one of these colors in this palette is a professional grade watercolor. We've got Winsor Newton, we've got Holbein, we've got PWC, we've got Sennelier, we've got M. Grams, we have Core, we have Daniel Smith, we've probably got some Turner in there as well. This is a ginormous palette, and as most watercolorists will tell you, you don't really need more than 12 colors in your watercolor palette. You should be able to mix any color you need with just 12 colors. And they're right, but I've got a reason for this ginormous watercolor palette, and I wanted to show it to you guys. It's been a little minute, so I thought I'd remind you guys, but I am a watercolor comic artist. The bulk of my work is comics, and the bulk of my work is in traditional watercolor. This is the first volume of 7" Carat. It came out in 2014. This is the second volume, which is legitimately twice as thick. It's just on nicer paper. It came out in 2020. And I do a lot of painting. I have painted hundreds of comic pages, whether it's in 7" Carat or it's in various anthologies. I am currently working on Chapter 9. This is what the pages from Chapter 9 look like. They're 11 by 14 on Canson Montval watercolor paper, and there's a lot of paint on here. And I could technically mix all of these colors for these pages. It would take me forever. So I use convenience colors because they are a convenience. They make painting something that already takes about 5 days for a batch of 3 to 4 pages. It makes it take a little bit less time. And as you guys saw by that palette, I use all of the colors in that palette. So a landscape artist might only need 12 colors. A floral artist might only need 12 colors. Most watercolor artists only need 12 colors. Sure, I'll go along with that. But I do think there are distinct use cases where you would want those convenience colors, where those convenience colors are useful to you. This is Payne's Gray. This is Winsor Newton's Payne's Gray. Now, I love me a good self-mixed Payne's Gray, burnt sienna with ultramarine blue, or maybe burnt umber with ultramarine blue, depending on how much granulation I want. But I like this Payne's Gray for metals because it gives a really beautiful, clean, metallic sort of gray that doesn't require a lot of mixing, and it doesn't necessarily have a lot of granulation to distract from it. Her dress here is a mix of French cerulean blue with a little bit of ultramarine blue. I was going for a specific color. So having a ginormous palette full of convenience colors really allows me to paint what I'm able to envision without it taking additional time. So yeah, I could definitely paint these pages with just 12 colors, but it would take forever. That said, I do paint with limited color palettes from time to time. This illustration was a field test of the Rosa Galleria 21 color palette. So this was painted with a gamut of fewer than 21 colors. This was painted with Supervision's little 12 color palette. And this was painted with Rembrandt's 12 color palette. So frequently when I'm reviewing watercolors, especially professional grade watercolors, I will work with a palette of about 12 to 21 colors. But I spend a lot of time mixing colors, swatching colors, figuring out what's going to work for me. I think if you're a watercolor comic artist or an illustrator, having a balance between the two, a palette, like knowing how to mix the colors you want from a small palette, but then adding in colors as you go, can be really beneficial. You shouldn't feel like you have to stick to a 12 color palette if you find that there's some colors that you need more frequently than other colors. Here, we are all artists. We are all making art, and I think a variety of different paths is totally valid. I came into watercolor from comics. I have an MFA in sequential art, and I'm here to tell you guys, use the tools you need to make the art you want to make. Don't let another artist's opinion of what is or what isn't value or what is or what isn't valuable or legitimate stop you from using the tools that are accessible to you, that you can afford and that you can access. But also, don't let a ginormous palette like mine make you feel like you're any less. They're all just different walks. Some of us are going to use convenience colors because we need them. We need those colors readily available because it eases up some part of our process. Some people find a lot of joy in mixing those individual colors and will mix their own Payne's grays and will mix their own oranges every single time. It really comes down to what you want out of your watercolors. I didn't start out with this ginormous watercolor palette full of different brands and full of different colors. I actually started out with a 12 color Winsor & Newton pocket sketch set years and years ago, and I added colors that friends recommended or that friends shared with me or that I fell in love with other people's work, and my palette grew over the years. It's been 10 years in the growth process, and when I switched from a 48 half pan palette to this ginormous megalith of a watercolor custom palette, I added a bunch of colors that I felt myself reaching for time and again. This whole bottom row, I call that the Naomi palette because these are unusual neons and pastels that are typically worn by my character Naomi. A lot of them are more opaque and require some differences in handling. That's why they're kind of in their own section. For a long time, I kind of turned my nose up at these more pastel colors because I just didn't know how to utilize them. But I have learned how to get good use out of them in the interim, so now they live in my palette. As I found that I needed more yellows and oranges, maybe for a specific purpose, because these are slightly more opaque. Maybe I want them to stand up in a wet and to wet when I have a purple or a black. I added those to my palette as well. Different paints and different pigments have different properties. There's going to be reasons why you might want them in your watercolor palette. So if you're asking the advice of a humble comic artist who comes from the world of comics, and let's be real, most fine artists don't consider comics art at all. In fact, a lot of art disciplines don't consider art or comics art at all. So take what I say with a grain of salt, but find the path that works for you. Find the materials that work for you and find the materials that bring you joy. This was kind of brought up because I've been doing a lot of research on various topics, different pigments, different brands, different paints for some upcoming reviews. And I just see a lot of if you're not using a simple 12 color mixing palette, then you're leaning too heavily on a crutch. You're leaning too heavily on these other colors. You don't need those. Don't be influenced by other artists. Don't listen to the art influencers. They're just here to sell you something. Y'all, I do not have any sponsors other than my Patreon. I don't have a publisher other than myself. And I purchase all of these out of pocket. They're not being sent to me. I don't see $1 if you go out and buy all of Daniel Smith, or you go out and you buy all of Winsor Newton or Holbein or PwC. These companies don't acknowledge that I exist, even when I tag them in my illustrations. So I'm just talking to you guys from my heart. There might be a reason to have a palette this huge. You might be a watercolor comic artist who paints hundreds of illustrations and comic pages a year, and you might need the convenience of these colors. There might be favorites in this palette that you prefer for botanicals, like undersea green and different opera roses, or phthalo blue, or bismuth yellow. When you're painting people, there might be a set of colors that you particularly like scarlet lake, or rose d'or, or yellow ochre, or burnt sienna, or burnt umber, or Van Dyke brown, or sepia. There might be colors that you like to use at the very end of a painting because they're a little bit more opaque to kind of add some of that light back in, like Naples yellow, or which one is this? I think it's New Gamboge, or Jean yellow 1 and 2, or buff titanium. Whatever your reasons are, pick paints that make you happy. And whether you consider yourself an artist or not, use art supplies that bring joy to your heart. You don't have to do things the way somebody else tells you to do them just because somebody else is telling you to do them. I bring this up because watercolor comic artist is vastly underrepresented in comics, in art, and on YouTube. There's only a handful of us, and I'm probably not even the loudest voice. We tend to be very overlooked. I'm one of the few people who are going to show you how to draw cartoony people, show you how to make comics out of it, and then teach you how to paint it all here on the channel. I have a boatload of experience, but it's hard to get people to take me seriously because my art looks like this. But there might be a reason someone is using a massive convenience palette, and watercolor comic artists are just kind of underrepresented when it comes to art forums, when it comes to art blogs. So there might be a reason, and don't let that deter you from using the supplies and using the colors that you really enjoy. When I tell you guys in some of my reviews that I am not particularly, I do care about light fastness to a degree. I don't want it to fade within a year. I don't care if it lasts 100 years. Y'all don't know the extent I mean that. When I die, my husband has been instructed to burn all of my art that is still in his possession, that he doesn't have a personal attachment to, or that our friends or family don't personally want. You guys do not know how anti-fine art I am. You guys do not know how important I think enjoying art in the moment, because it means something to you personally. It speaks to you. It communicates to you. It makes you feel something. That is what art exists for. You guys don't know how much I hate Jackson Pollock's work, because I think art should belong to everyone, and comics and printmaking are so egalitarian. They are so out there. They are so for mass consumption, and yet both are treated like lesser art forms that don't deserve respect and don't deserve attention. But they are painstaking art forms that require you to become good at drawing everything: people, plants, animals, buildings, nature, man-made objects. You gotta learn how to draw it all if you're gonna become a comic artist. And maybe you're not the best at drawing every single thing you have to draw, but you have to draw it in a way that people can tell what you're drawing. And you have to do it fairly quickly, because look at this. There might be 2 illustrations on a page. There might be 4 illustrations on a page. There might be 6 or even 9 illustrations on a page. So you have to keep in mind that every single panel being beautifully rendered does not always serve your comic page. This kind of turned into a rant. It's a topic that I feel intensely passionate about. I love comics. They bring me so much joy. I wish everyone read comics. I think they offer so much to the literary landscape, and they're still kind of snoozed upon, and that kind of bums me out. And I would love to see more people dedicate the time and energy and attention and storytelling that it takes to creating their own comic. I've got 3 playlists dedicated to that. So hopefully that'll be inspiring to you guys. But since I was reviewing a different watercolor palette actually, and I was thinking about 12 color mixing palettes, of which I have many and I happen to love them, I was also thinking about my behemoth convenience color daily driver comic art palette. And I wanted to kind of share it with you guys, share my rationale for why it is as huge as it is, and show you guys what I make with this palette. So I hope this was inspiring to you guys. I hope you could capture, I hope you felt some of the affection that I feel for the art form, some of the passion and the hope that I want to present. I want to get people fired up, and also some of the love that I feel for you guys. And I want to encourage you in your own artistic journeys. Even if your palette looks like this, even if you have trouble curating your hoard of watercolors, and even if you're a watercolor comic artist like me.